Well, good evening to another of our In Conversation with Healers. And I am delighted this evening to be talking to Roger Ford. You may have attended one of our events in the past with Roger Ford because the Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary has been doing a lot of online work over the past 18 months with Healing in America. And Roger is one of the directors for that and CEO. To give some background on Roger before we get into the questions, Roger is an internationally recognized holistic energy healer, and he's been so for 39 years. He is fully committed to developing the spiritual and personal growth of others interested in alternative and complementary healing methods. He actively encourages the link between the medical profession and complementary practitioners to take an integrated, holistic approach to health, conventional and complementary therapies working together for the good of the client. Roger lives and teaches his deeply held conviction that each one of us has the ability to heal ourselves and others. Moving from Britain in 2002, he co-founded Healing in America, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping people develop their healing gifts and providing support to complementary healing practitioners. Students hail from a wide variety of backgrounds, including the medical and veterinary fields. These classes are held throughout the United States, and workshops are certified by the California Board of Registered Nurses, the American Holistic Nurses Association, the National Certification Board for Massage Therapists and Bodywork, and the Board of California Chiropractic Doctors. Roger's dedication and extensive experience have fostered a practical and intuitive approach to wellness. This enables Roger to connect with his students on many levels. Roger and his wife, Kim, also run a holistic healing center in Ojai, California for 11 years, creating a healing community for like-minded people. He runs monthly community meditation and healing groups in Ojai, Camarillo, and Santa Barbara. Those who work with Roger find him to be forthright and sincere as he maintains a caring, down-to-earth approach to wellness. His primary desire is to help others in their quest for physical, mental, and spiritual health, so his students and clients can in turn help others. Roger has a professional practice in Ojai, California, where he sees clients for personal sessions, as well as offering distant healing to those people not able to travel. Wow, that is some bio, Roger. You have achieved so much in your time. It is highly impressive. And whilst I was reading this, I felt, I need to go into sprint mode to try and keep up with you and catch up with you. Got a long way to go. Very impressive indeed, and just amazing work that you're doing. So in addition to what I've covered in this bio, to get to know you a bit better, can you tell us a bit more about your background, including what you did before healing?
Right, good question. Well, I was obviously born in England and born during the Second World War, and I lived a pretty mundane life, I guess. My first job, I think, was in banking. I joined a bank for a few years, and then I went into sales. I joined an Italian company selling things, and then I ran my own company for a little while in England. So nothing spectacular, nothing sort of outstanding. But I think I've always been interested in health, and when I was a kid, I did have these desires to become a doctor, and I was at grammar school, but I really wasn't bright enough, I guess, because we had to learn in those days, and it may be the same now, but you had to learn Latin, which I really struggle with. But I did have this desire to help people. And I guess that's what really sort of came into the fore in a little bit later in my life. So nothing outstanding there. We had a good family life, I will say that. We had a very happy secure family life, a lot of fun. And although we didn't have much money, we spent a lot of time with our relatives and things. We had a large family, all within a few miles of each other. So so I think that's really helped in sort of keeping me grounded.
How lovely. And when did you first become interested in healing?
Well, I think, consciously I became interested in 1978, just after my father died. But then once I started to become more active in finding out about healing, I realized that even as a youngster, I was actually doing healing, but I didn't recognize it as healing. For instance, when I think I was 7 or 8 years old, maybe, one of my aunties had really bad arthritis. She couldn't move her fingers, and she'd been like that for years. And one weekend I was with her, and she was talking about how she was limited with a sort of movement in her fingers. And for some reason, I just said, "Can I just hold your hands for a minute, Auntie?" So I did. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I said it even. And I did it for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, went out to play, never thought any more about it. And the next week I went to see her again, and she said, "You're never going to believe it. Just look at my fingers." And she was moving her fingers. She was knitting again, which she hadn't been able to do for many, many years. And so looking back, I realized that maybe that gift, if you like, was already there, and I just needed to develop it. And several other instances when I was a youngster, I was doing things, particularly with animals. I used to find that people used to bring me their animals that had been damaged or, were ill. I used my hands on them for a bit, and they used to get up and walk around. But again, I didn't think, well, that's amazing. I just assumed that everybody could do the same thing. But it was really in 1978 when I lost my father in 77 with cancer, and that really started. I was exploring, like a lot of people do, I think, what the meaning of life was. I tried to find out, why did he have to die? And he died quite young. And so I started going to some spiritualist churches in England, different ones in Somerset where we lived. And every time I went to one of these spiritualist meetings, whoever was doing the service just came to me and said, "Did you know that you're a healer?" And it's very difficult these days to understand, but in those days, and this is going back 40 years now, healing wasn't talked about like it is today, and there weren't the books around, there wasn't information around, and so it was difficult to try and develop that gift that I was told I'd got, but eventually I did, and here we are.
And when did you first experience healing on yourself?
Well, when I started searching around, somebody told me about a couple of people in Glastonbury, Tony and Margaret Payne, who some of you in England might know. They're both past now, but they run a meditation group every month. So I went down to see them, and that's when I first experienced healing. And I was absolutely blown away. To me, this was absolutely what I've been searching for, I guess, for many years. And so it was through them that I then started to develop healing.
And how did you take your healing journey further from there?
Well, I then decided I needed to train properly. So I joined what was the NFSH in those days, which was started with Harry Edwards. So I did my training, just a couple of years training, and then I trained then to become a trainer. And that really was when things started to move forward. And as a lot of you all know, we talk about becoming a healer, but I think healing is not like a job where, you sort of start at 9 a.m. and you finish at 5. It's more of a way of life. And I think it was through that organization and through what I learned from other people, the disciplines that you need to do to actually develop that gift, which I believe we all have. And I still work on it today.
So you became the chairman of Region 4 for the NFSH as well. So you developed leadership positions there as well, didn't you?
I did. I was I was a regional chairman for 3 years, I think it was, and so I
Yeah.
met a lot of healers and looked at the way they did things and so on and so forth, and eventually evolved my way of doing things, which was obviously very much based on what you teach at the Harry Edwards Sanctuary today.
Yeah. So your chair role covered Bristol, Gloucester and Somerset, I believe, those areas. So that's quite
Yeah,
a large area to cover, isn't it?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
And I worked a lot with people, but what I used to find interesting was people would complain that they never heard anything from anybody from the region. And so I decided to go out and actually meet people in their location. So I went to Gloucester and different places. And that all these people would say, oh yeah, we want to come and meet you and see you. And so you drive up to Gloucester, which was, about an hour and a half drive, I guess, in the pouring rain, and you go to the meeting and there'd be two people there, which was fine. But I often found that people, said they were going to do things and didn't always do it. And that's part of life, I think, particularly in the healing profession.
Mm. So you were offering workshops and healer training, and then you actually worked in Weston-super-Mare Hospital, didn't you? Tell us about that and the work you were doing there.
Yes, that came really. I was working at, I was running meditation groups at Weston-super-Mare College. And one of the people that was sitting on or used to come to that little group was a nurse. And she said we could really do with this in the hospital at Weston. So I went to see one of the doctors there. And like a lot of these doctors, they weren't interested at all. So then I found another doctor who wasn't interested. Then I found another doctor who was an oncologist who was interested. And so I then offered not to necessarily go onto the wards, but offered healing for nurses, because everybody was telling me how stressed nurses and doctors are. So we actually offered it during a lunchtime. And it built up gradually. And then we finished up with probably, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 doctors and nurses coming for an hour once a month for a meditation group and a healing circle. And that really, was encouraging to see that people in hospitals were open to what we were doing.
And you then opened a holistic healing centre, I believe, with Kim, your wife.
Yeah, we had a healing centre. For those of you in England, though, we had a healing centre in Churchill, which is about 10 miles from Bristol. And we used to run workshops there. We used to have other complementary therapists working there. So I've always believed in opening up what we do to other complementary therapies. And I think the word complementary is so important. Particularly in the States, everybody talks about alternative. And one of the things we've had to do since we've been here is to try to introduce this complementary way of talking rather than alternative. But in England, complementary is fairly common. So in our healing centre, we had people doing acupuncture, aromatherapy, reflexology, obviously healing, and other modalities. And the way that we worked was we only had the people that rented the space that were very open to recommending what is best for the client. So if, for instance, a patient, the therapist recognized that this patient, although they'd perhaps come for acupuncture, what they could really do with was aromatherapy or reflexology, then they would recommend they saw the other practitioner in our center. And so there's this great allowing people not to be so, and we see this a lot, unfortunately. This is my client, hands off sort of thing. And I believe it very strongly in that today, that people need to be able to allow people to have the best possible treatments that they can get from whoever.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that.
And then an English patient who had lived in Ojai gave you direction to another country, I believe.
He did, yes. I've never forgiven him.
And here you are now.
He came for healing, and he had a brain tumor, a really nice guy. And I worked with him, and I was seeing him 3 times a week for many, many weeks. But he kept talking about the work that we were doing, both Kim and I doing, how he'd lived in Ojai in America, and how badly this sort of work was needed in the United States. And he kept on about this place called Ojai, which we'd never heard of. But he kept insisting, you've got to take this work, you've got to take this work. And then one night I said to Kim, look, he keeps on about this place called Ojai. Let's just have a look on the internet and see what it's all about. So, it took us about 20 minutes to spell it right. And it's actually spelled O-J-A-I. And
I was pronouncing it wrong for months.
Yeah, well, most people do. And then I saw a picture of Ojai on the internet, one of the Chamber of Commerce pictures. And I thought, wow, this looks amazing. All these beautiful mountains and everything. And so I said to Kim, I'm going to go out and have a look at this place. So within a couple of weeks, I flew out and I really fell in love with it. And for those of you that live in the States may know that Ojai is a very spiritual place. It's actually in a valley, so we're surrounded with mountains. And it's one of the, somebody told me, it's one of the 2 places in the world where the mountains actually go from east to west. Most mountain ranges are north to south. And because of this east to west, there is this vortex of energy. So you can actually feel it when you arrive here. Anyway, I fell in love with it. I met a couple of people. One was a doctor who was very keen on what we were doing. So I went back and I looked after the children. Kim flew out and she felt the same. She came back. She said, it's an amazing place. What do we do? And I said, well, I don't know. What do we do? And in the meantime, Andy was saying, you've got to go, you've got to go. So we decided to meditate. So we just sat there one evening and just sent out this thought, literally, what do you want us to do? And this voice, as loud as I'm talking to you, just said, you have to move.
Oh.
And I was shocked. And I said, move? And this voice said, move. So we talked about it, Kim and I then talked about it. I said, well, what should we do? We don't know anybody there. What are we going to do? And she very wisely said, well, on our workshops, we teach people to follow their guidance, follow their intuition. How can we stand in front of people and say that if we don't do it? So I said, okay, well, let's move. So we put our hat on the market. And like a lot of these things, if they're meant to be, it was so easy to move. And this was a time when moving wasn't that easy, but a couple came who just sold their house in Spain. They wanted to move into our place. They'd got no electrical stuff because their electrical stuff in Spain it's different voltage. So they bought everything. And we moved. And Kim moved in the September of 2002. I'd already got some workshops to finish off in Bristol, some healing workshops. So I stayed until December and then we moved.
So you say Ojai is very spiritual. I've never been to Ojai yet. And I understand that Sedona is very spiritual as well. Would you say they're very similar?
To what? Sedona. Yeah, yes. I mean, there are some very spiritual places, Boulder, Sedona. There are quite a few places in the States that are very spiritual. But the thing that did surprise me was, and this is going back now 20 years, is that I assumed that the medical profession would be much more open than that I'd found the medical profession in England. Mm. It was really quite a shock because when we were in Churchill in England, a lot of our clients actually came from either from hospitals or from local doctors. They were referring people to us. And so I just assumed, well, America being America, it's got to be 10 years in front. And I was amazed when I started to contact doctors here. And as soon as I said, I'm an energy healer or a spiritual healer, they put the phone down.
Oh.
So that was really challenging. And it took me, and I'll never forget, it took me 45 calls to doctors before the first one said, yes, I'm interested, come and see me. And I'd been turned down so much, I wasn't quite sure what to say because But he said, let's just meet for a cup of tea. And we met, and he was really instrumental in sort of really starting to help us move forward in those links with the medical profession.
And I understand you volunteered in 2 hospitals in oncology departments.
Yeah, so I then we did talks and so on and so forth. Started to do our workshops here, which were great. And then I approached the several hospitals, but I went to see oncologists. And for those of you that really want to try and work in hospitals, either in the States or in England, I find that people in oncology are usually very open to what we do. And so one of the oncologists was in Santa Barbara. Just excuse me a second. We ran a little introduction to energy healing with a couple of hours. And this oncologist came and sat in on that, and she really loved what we did. And so she contacted us and said, would you like to come and work with some of the cancer patients? And it took her 2 years to get the hospital to agree that we could actually go in and do this work. So we started to go in, and it was incredibly well received. Energy healing really was well received. And we used to get maybe 25, 30 cancer patients. And we were doing our healing circles, which I know a lot of you are involved with. If you're not, we can talk a little bit about what it means and so on later on. At the same time, I was working in another hospital in Oxnard. Again, and all this was voluntary. I wasn't doing it for money, but in another oncology department, working just with cancer patients. But the irony, and this, I'll just share this little story with you, is that we were there a couple of years. I was working for a couple of years in Santa Barbara. And then somebody from the Los Angeles Times approached me and wanted to do an article on energy healing, on spiritual healing. And I saw this reporter, and I mentioned to him that we were doing this work in a hospital in Santa Barbara. And he said, wow, he said, that's a great angle. He said, I can really make that into something. I said, good. And he said, well, I really need to contact them to get permission to be able to publish this. So I said, okay, fine. Anyway, long story short, he contacted the hospital. He spoke to the chairman of the hospital. The chairman did not know we were doing healing. And the same day this reporter called him, he called in this doctor who worked for him effectively, and said, it's got to stop immediately. We're not having it. And the irony, and this really was irony at its best, they actually put a notice up in the waiting room which said there will be no more healing in this hospital.
No.
Unfortunately, in those days, I didn't have a cell phone, so I couldn't have taken a picture of it. But so we stopped. And
oh no.
Yeah, and that was, that sort of was very sad. And I know a lot of the cancer patients were so upset about this. They wrote letters and all the rest of it. But they were concerned about, working in a hospital, we weren't insured for this, and what happens if a patient slipped, and all this negative stuff that people come up with. So I carried on with the other hospital for a while. And now, ironically, the doctor, Julie Taguchi, who some of you may know if you live in the States, has now started her own practice. And she spoke to me about a year ago, and we now start doing healing and healing circles and meditations in her own practice. So I go over to her practice once a month, and we picked up.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you also offer through Healing in America certified holistic energy healing training courses, don't you, both in person and online? Tell us a bit about that.
So it's basically the same sort of topics as covered by the Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary, and because healing is not all that well known, it's been quite challenging to get sort of decent numbers of people. But like all of these things, I believe it's the right people will find you at the right time for them. And up until a couple of years ago, when COVID became as prevalent as it is, I'd always avoided the online bit, because I thought, well, how can you actually teach people how to do hands-on when you're doing it online? So we'd put it off and put it off. But then through COVID, we really couldn't see people live. So, and in fact, a little bit like you and I were talking about beforehand, before the recording, Alison, it really sort of opened up a new world for us, because we're now able to, and we do, attract people that come from different states in America. And I think we've now got, we've got people that have been trained in about 27, 28 different states. So it's sort of worked in our favor to be able to offer both. And so we say to people, if you want to come to an in-person one, that's great. If you want to do online, it's great. And you can alternate. So some people start off with an online, and then they come to Ojai for a live part. You know, we do the three modules, if you like. And it's growing. You know, I think that there's a huge shift as we're going through. We talked about this on previous talks, that more and more people are starting to take more interest in the sort of work that we're doing. And it's really encouraging to know that. And I foresee the time, I absolutely, truly believe this, where the doctor's surgeries of the future will have complementary therapists working in the same building. And so it's this shift of being able to, what is best for the client? You know, if you're suffering from stress and anxiety, you don't want tablets necessarily, but maybe you should join a meditation group or have healing or whatever, you know, is available. And I really see this sort of working together, not in competition. And that's why I mentioned the word complementary is so important in my view, that it's not this or that, it's work together for the good of the patient, the good of the client.
I absolutely agree with you 100% on all that. And the thing with medications is we've got some amazing medications out there that do a lot of good work, but sometimes for some people there can be side effects to those medications, with those medications. But with healing, there's no side effects at all. And it can really help support what your doctor, what your consultant is doing medically. You know, particularly in helping to relax the patient, because if they have more bouts of relaxation, which healing does help provide, then not only will the healing energy reach the parts they need to reach more quickly, but also whatever the doctors are doing as well, it helps what they're doing as well. So it has the potential to be a win-win. Yeah,
it is a win-win. And occasionally I'll get clients that have cancer, and they ask the question, you know, what should I do? Should I carry on with my chemo, or should I just go completely complementary and do this? I had a lady who just came back from I think she was doing an intensive juicing program in Germany. She came back and she was very much into health. You know, she was and a very spiritual, lovely lady. And she said to me, well, you know, what do I do? Do I give up my chemo and just do complementary, or what do I do? And that's a difficult question. So I said to her, what do you think you should do? And she said to me, what do you think I should do? And this little banter went backwards and forwards for a bit. Anyway, in the end, she decided what I thought was the right decision, which was to do both.
Yeah.
So she carried on with the chemo, but at the same time, she was having healing, and she'd already decided to go vegetarian. So that was really interesting.
And then in 2020, we view ourselves at the Sanctuary very fortunate. We started joint ventures with your good selves, Healing in America, yourself and Kim. And I have to give credit to our chairman, Martin Thomas, because he was in contact with you originally.
Yes.
and was in contact with you for a wee while, and then he introduced me to you, and we had an initial Zoom, and then we started scoping out how we could possibly do some joint ventures, bearing in mind the distance between us geographically. And that led to our online events, and it's been an absolutely lovely journey doing these online events with both you and Kim. And I think that keeping that connection between our two organizations is something we will always want to do, and to keep that going, and hopefully it will evolve as well.
It will, and to be able to do these calls internationally, I think is really important, so that we can share. And I've noticed how people are much more willing to talk on these calls, and ask questions. And as you and I have both discussed many times, is that if any of you that are watching this little interview this morning, if you've got any thoughts of what you'd like to learn about or you'd like us to do in the future, then do let either myself or Alison know, and we could consider introducing other aspects to really broaden it out. The more people that know about healing, the more people that we're going to be able to help. The world is desperately short of healers at the moment, I believe. There are so many people in need of healing that we just need to do as much as we can. And we really appreciate what you've done, Alison. You've done all the hard work. I just come on and say a few words. It's great.
Oh, I don't know, you and Kim have done a lot of hard work too, but thank you for your thanks. But no, I think it's a really lovely connection that we've got going there, and I would endorse what you say about if people have any ideas on what they'd like us to do talks on going forward, to let us know. But also if they have any ideas on different activities for us to do, do get in contact. We are open to ideas, because I think newness helps keep things going.
Right.
Now we've touched a little bit on the journey that you've had to get healing introduced in various areas in the USA, sort of along the way. In 2023, would you say that it's easier to be a healing practitioner in the UK or the USA? And what are the differences?
Wow, that's a good question. Is it easier? I think, and things change, but I think healing is much more spoken about in England. It's not weird. In America, there is still some areas where they sort of frown on this sort of weird stuff that you do. And I know when I first moved here, which was just before Christmas, as I mentioned, and we'd moved in, we didn't know anybody, so we decided we would invite everybody up the street where we lived, who we'd never met, but we invited them to that house just to say hello. And on that first night, people would come up to you and say, I'm so and so and so. And I'd say, I'm Roger Ford. And they'd say, what do you do? And I'd say, well, I'm a healer. And I could see people literally moving back. I mean, it was, and then they'd look over my shoulder and say, excuse me, I've just got to go and talk. And then off they'd go. And I have to say, most of those people we've never seen since. But it is becoming more well-known, I think. But one of the things people were reluctant about was the word spiritual. And I know this has been a sort of something that's been spoken about a lot with the Harry Edwards Centre as well. Do we call it spiritual healing or energy healing, or what do we call it? It doesn't really matter what we call it. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's becoming more well-known, but certainly on the West Coast, which is where we are, and the East Coast, it's much more available than it is in Central America. In the Midwest, I think it's still, many people still frown on it, and it's lack of knowledge, and I think if we can talk about it in simplistic terms rather than try and make it really weird and complicated, people will accept it.
And how did you first hear about the Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary?
Well, I heard about Harry Edwards when I first started to learning a little bit about healing, and obviously through the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, as it was, it's now the Healing Trust. So I heard about him, read quite a few of Harry Edwards' books, and obviously was aware of the sanctuary. And since we came here, we've always wanted to have this sort of link, but we weren't sure how to do it. And I think it was really when Martin joined. I don't know how long he was with you before I found out about him, but in fact, I think it was Margaret Coates, who's the animal healer, that mentioned his name. And through that, I emailed him, and we sort of did a couple of emails, and then we did a Zoom call, and after that, we sort of moved forward. So.
And when was your first visit to the sanctuary?
Believe it or not, my actual first visit was when we met you last year.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I'd not been to the sanctuary before. And so it was, I mean, I knew about it, I knew about you.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of all of our workshops, and we've always done this since we've been here, we've always shown the little video that you've got, and it's probably an old, well, it is an old video now, of the sanctuary. And it's about a 10 or 15 minute video about the work that you do there. And I think that when people first come on a workshop, it gives them that reassurance that what they're about to learn is not new age, it's been around for a long time, and it gives them that feeling of stability and credibility. And so I'm starting a new workshop this afternoon, and the first thing I talk about, Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary, and we show the video.
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the things that has really struck me about Harry Edwards is how much he was a man ahead of his time.
Yeah.
And when you read his work, yes, the way it's written reflects the time period that it was written in. But if you take out the actual nuggets of information, they're actually absolutely applicable to today. Yeah. And the advice is applicable to today as well. And you can learn so much from Harry and his work.
Yeah,
most definitely.
Yes,
so
you can.
Moving on to healing, we've sort of gone through your background. Thank you for that. Moving on to healing, what does healing mean to you?
Well, I think the easy answer is being able to allow people to heal themselves. I think a healer really is a catalyst with a healing journey. And a lot of people I know seem to feel that it's your responsibility to fix me. And I don't believe it is. I believe what we have to do is to encourage people to take the steps to heal themselves, and we simply assist in that journey for them. And I'm not always, I don't say that on the first visit of people, but as I get to know clients when they come back and so on, and we get to know each other well, I make sure they're aware that the responsibility is theirs. And like all the healers, we all see amazing things happen to people, but we have to remember that it isn't us doing it. A lot of healers come out of they feel that it's themselves. They come out of, I've done this and I've done that, and it isn't you that's doing it. You're just there to assist in that process.
Why is healing so important to you?
I think healing is probably one of the most amazing gifts that we've all got. And to see people change from, and you see this on workshops as well, but from people that have come in with illnesses, really poorly, some of them, and to see them go through that process of finishing up being well and healthy and happy. And it's something which it's almost intangible, but it's such an amazing feeling that you've been a part of assisting in that journey for them.
When you are conducting a healing session, as the healer, do you personally feel anything? I
do, but interestingly, and this has come up a couple of times, people say to me, as the healer, what did you feel? And sometimes I see things. I'm certainly very sensitive to energy. But one of the things I sometimes find is I'm working with a patient, put my hand on the shoulders, and I actually feel, I don't feel much is happening today. You know, I don't feel the energy's flowing through me. And at the end of the healing session, I say to the patient, how are you feeling? And although I felt nothing, they'll say, that was absolutely amazing. I felt this warmth, this da da da. And another time, the opposite. I put my hands on, I feel this rush of energy flowing into the patient. And I'll say, how are you feeling? And I'll say, I didn't feel anything. And so I've learned it's not what you really feel, it's what happens with your client or your patient. But like all healers, we get we see things, we hear things, and you have to decide what you're actually going to share with your patient, with your client.
For those who go on,
sorry,
go on, you finish.
I'm always honest with people. If I feel something's a little bit out of balance, I'll tell them. You know, I don't try and smooth it over, but I'll give them a reason why maybe this is out of balance because of this, and then, you know, give them a way of working through that.
Yeah. For those who've never had healing, what actually happens during a healing session when you're giving a healing session?
Well, the way I work is I usually spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes really just allowing the patient or the client to talk, because it's important for you and the patient to have a rapport. So I find out why they're there. I usually ask what medication they're on, not that you're going to say come off it, but I'm just curious sometimes as to what they're on. I always say to them, have you seen a doctor? And we encourage our healers that we train to always ask, have you seen a doctor? If they haven't, to suggest that they do. And then I explain to them what I'm going to be doing, because I think people for the first time, if they've never had healing before, they're not sure what to expect. And so I always ask permission if it's okay just to touch very lightly, either on just on the outside of the arms, on the legs or whatever. So when you get that permission, I say, I'm just going to put my hands on your shoulders just for a few minutes. I usually use the word to tune in, just allow the energy to start to flow through me into you. You may feel warmth, you may feel cool, you may feel nothing at all. That doesn't mean to say nothing's happening. And then I balance the chakras and I explain what they are. Most people these days know what a chakra is. When I first started, nobody knew what a chakra was. So it's much easier in that respect. Balance the chakras and then just work around the body. And I tell the client, what I'm looking for is anywhere that the energy seems a little bit different to me, which means there's potentially a blockage there. And if there's a blockage, I release that blockage. And I sometimes say a little bit like a plumber, you know, if your drain's blocked, they release the blockage and obviously everything flows, and I do that. And then I explain when I finished. I'm going to take about 20 minutes, 25 minutes when I finished. I'm going to give you a little squeeze on the arm, just to let you know I've done, so they know what to expect. I always ask them to send out an intention. So when they first start, whilst I'm tuning in, I ask them to send out a thought to the universe, what it is they want to receive that particular healing session. And then when I finish, I squeeze them on the arm, give them a few minutes to come round. And then the only question I ever ask is, how are you feeling? And I just allow them then to ask whatever questions they want. And that's it.
What would you say are the key advantages of spiritual healing?
The key, well, I think it opens up not just the physical. People usually come for a physical problem, as you know, but I think beneath that there are other problems or other things people are looking for. One is emotional stuff. A lot of the physical illnesses, a lot of you watching this will know, I believe a lot of physical stuff is caused by blocked emotional stuff. And also these days, I think people are lost. People are looking for the spirituality. They want your views on, well, what do you believe is this, or what do you believe happens when we die? And so I think there's an exploration really of healers sharing with them what their beliefs are, not necessarily what the person has to believe, but what their beliefs are. And so I think it's an integral part of the healing process is all of these aspects which make up health.
Mhm.
I don't believe that health is just a body that's got no pain anymore. I think we've got to be in the right relationship. We've got to have the right jobs. We've got to have the right healing practices. We've got to meditate. All of these things together. If you've got all that lot right, you'll be well. I don't think you'll be ill. I truly believe that. But very often people will come and they'll tell you that, this is wrong and that's wrong, and they don't do anything about it. And so encouraging them to take that step forward and make some changes.
Does healing always work in your view?
I always think there's a change in people, always a change. And some people say, well, what happens if you have a client that actually dies or has a transition shortly after you've worked with them? And I think actually that process is still a part of healing. You're actually preparing that person. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen where you're working with clients who are very, very poorly. And they're more interested, I think, in understanding that all that's going to happen is that they're going to transition from one dimension to another dimension. And so I don't necessarily believe that when you lose a patient, you failed as a healer. I did. In my early days, I thought, well, what could I have done differently to say? And you realize that, of course, it isn't you that makes that decision whether someone lives or dies, but you can help smooth that transition where people are perhaps frightened of dying, and that's an awful state of mind to be in. So by talking to them and helping them, you can help that passing.
Do you think the body can heal itself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's what happens, is the body does heal itself. I think what happens very often is that we get in the way. As you know, if you just nick your finger with you cut your finger, you don't have to know what to do. The body sends white blood cells, it makes the blood a little bit thicker, the bleeding stops. And so we overthink things, I think, sometimes, and keeping things simple is sometimes the best.
What do you feel makes a good healer?
I think you have to have compassion. You have to really have a desire to help people. And I think you also have to keep continually working on your own healing. I don't think it's a stagnant thing. I think we are all going through these changes, and we have to, as you mentioned with Harry Edwards, we move with the times. The language may be old, but the principles are the same. But I think we have to move with the times. And I think also realizing that healing is not as I said earlier on, it's not a job. It's a way of life for us as healers, and we need to set an example to other people.
And it's about an ongoing learning, I think, for healers, about developing your own spirituality and becoming more spiritual as well.
And that's what we're here for, is to learn. If we were really high spiritual beings, we wouldn't need to be here. We stay up there somewhere in the non-physical, but we're here to go through these experiences and share what knowledge that we have.
Can you tell us about some of your healing successes?
Wow. Yeah, I can tell you. Yeah, I can tell you. Probably one of the most profound, and in fact, it was a success, but it didn't finish the way I wanted it to, which was this was in England when I hadn't been trained all that long, and I had a young boy whose father brought him to me, and he was 7 years old, and he had leukemia. And his father told me that the doctors had said, there's nothing else we can do, take him home. He's going to last probably 2 weeks at the most, but just make him comfortable. And his father brought him to me for healing. And he was one of these little boys. He didn't speak all that much, but he really took to healing. He really opened up. And I saw him, I think, in October time. And I saw him 3 times a week for a couple of months, but he got better. And by Christmas of that year, he was actually playing football with his pals out in the street, kicking the football around. And so that was absolutely amazing that this little boy that had been told he got only a couple of weeks to live should be able to progress to the state where he was fine. And I wish I could say to you with hand on heart that he lived happily ever after. Unfortunately, about a year after that, I heard his father just phoned me out of the blue, and I'd stopped seeing him because after he got better, I just saw him once a week and then once a month, and then stopped seeing him. And he did actually die, and he caught an infection, and long story short, his body went out of balance completely. And he was 8 then, he did make his transition. So that was a success, but it was, and it wasn't a failure, but it was obviously his time to go. But the lesson I learned from that, to be honest, Alison, was that after he died, and I went to his funeral, I think, which was I found that really challenging. But I had a phone call from his mum, 2 of his aunties, and his grandma. And I assumed they wanted to come and see me for healing. But what they actually came for was not for healing. They wanted to know my thoughts on dying and what happened when people died. And so looking back at that, I think, well, maybe this was part of Robert, his name was, Robert's journey was to go early, plan to go early, to give this opportunity for his mum and his aunties and his grandma to explore spirituality. And funnily enough, that was the first time when that happened, and I had this thought that I actually linked it back to my own dad, because he died early. He was young. And I thought, well, maybe part of his journey was to go early to allow me to do the same thing, to start exploring, because maybe I wouldn't have become a healer had he not died early. And so I think all of these challenges that we perhaps think are challenges we go through open up other opportunities for us.
Yeah. You've said earlier in tonight's conversation that everybody has a healing ability. What advice would you give anyone thinking of becoming a healer?
I think it's important to be properly trained to do healing. And I have quite a few people phone me and say, I don't need to come on your courses because I already do healing. I say, good, if you do healing, that's fine. And then I usually follow it up with, how do you feel when you've done a healing? And they always say, I feel tired. And I say, interesting. Maybe you should do the course. So I really would, for anybody that's watching this that isn't a healer but are curious about it, I would honestly recommend getting in touch with Alison and the Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary if you're in England, finding out about their workshops. If you're in the States, find out about ours or other people's. And I think it needs to resonate with you. You need to have a feeling that this is right for me. And when I usually write to people with our information, I usually put in the words, if this resonates with you, it probably means you should be doing it. But I think we've all got that gift, as I've said before, but I think being trained, not only for helping other people, but to help ourselves. I think there is so much self-healing needed. The majority of people, I have to say, when they come on workshops, they talk about, becoming a healer. When we get to level 2 or level 3, and we've peeled away a few layers of the onion to that person, the one on the course, I realize that they've come for their own healing.
I mean, I'm quite a new healer. I trained a few years ago at Harry Edwards, and I passed my panel just over a year ago. And I remember being told at the start of the 2-year course, and in England we have to do a 2-year course, that you are a different person when you qualify as a healer, and that this course develops you. And I actually viewed that comment with some skepticism, and I thought, really? But by goodness, they were absolutely correct. And I do feel that the course helped me to grow and evolve spiritually in ways that I wasn't actually intending, but were really good, and really grow. And one thing we've started at Harry Edwards as well is it's the brainchild of one of our tutors, Margaret. She now runs a 1-year course called Healer Know Thyself, and this is for qualified healers, and it's about developing your own spirituality even more and developing yourself even more, so that that pathway still keeps growing. And I'm on that course now. I've just finished module 2, absolutely loving it and learning so much as well, and really feeling that growth, which is excellent. So yeah, completely agree with you there.
It's so important. We actually do the same. We run our normal course, and then we do an advanced course. And the topics in the advanced course have come from students who've been on our workshops and say, you know, cover this. Do you talk about using a pendulum? Do you talk about the 5th dimension? So all of these topics really have come from requests from students. So they, like you, we've got an ongoing path for existing healers to continue their growth. Really
Do you have any top tips of how qualified healers can become even better healers and how they can strengthen their attunement still further?
Well, I think practice makes perfect, and so the more healing you do, the more easier it becomes, if you like. But I think the other thing is, I think we're moving to a time where, rather than be individuals, we need to work collectively. And therefore, I think belonging to a group and getting support is really important, because we have in the States here, we have some of the healers, I mentioned all these states, we've trained people in some states where they're the only person in that state that's been trained. So in North Carolina, I think we've got a healer, and it's very isolating to do that. So they need somehow to be able to tune in to other healers, to be able to connect with other healers and share and talk, and with obviously with the tutors. And so we're great believers in mentoring people and having like these talks, if you like, opportunities to be able to share concerns and experiences with other healers. But keep on your own healing and keep on with your own meditation and so on.
Yeah. We've touched already on working with the medical profession in a complementary way, not alternative. Do you have any tips for working with the medical profession more closely?
The way that we approached it really was is to approach the nurses. And in the States here, nurses, probably the same as in England, they have to do so many continuing education contact hours. And so we applied for both in California for the California Board of Nurses and the American Holistic Nurses. And I have to say, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get this authorization to be able to offer contact hours, but we got both of those. And so we attract nurses onto our workshops, and we always encourage them to take the work, and I'm sure they do, back into the hospitals and talk to the doctors. One of the things I think, I'm sure, and we've done it in say over here, is to, if you feel confident enough, to actually approach the hospitals, and usually through the human resources of all places, and say that you would like to actually offer healing to some of the nurses. Nurses are stressed, they're leaving hospitals in droves, and the nursing profession, as you know. And so anything that can keep nurses well themselves, and doctors, like we did in Western Hospital, I think would be well received. And I think the time is right to actually approach hospitals like that. So rather than say, I want to come in the hospital wards, initially go for, we want to help the nurses with doing healing and healing circles and meditations once a month, just for an hour. And you have to do it in the hospitals rather than getting the nurses to leave somewhere, go somewhere else. But go to the hospitals and talk to them if you feel happy about that.
Looking to the future, what do you feel is the future for spiritual healing?
I think it's going to become much more common. It's over in the States, and I think it's the same in England. Things like Reiki are incredibly popular. Healing, we have healing touch over here, which I don't think is in England. Maybe it is. So I think all of these healing modalities, if you like, and I mean energy healing by that.
Mhm.
I think they're going to be much. The science is there now. 20 years ago, people poo-pooed it, but now there is scientific proof that healing works. It's not a sort of something in our imaginations. We're not weird people. We're not that weird, and I think the science is there to back up what we are saying. And as things progress, and there are so many people now talking on the television about healing, you look at YouTube and there's so many videos, all of this stuff, it's becoming much more common. And I think the people that we need to attract are youngsters.
Mm.
I do talks at one of the colleges here, and even 16 or 17-year-olds, they are so full of this stuff. They're so open to it. And these are the people of the future, I think, where they're going to be, the healers of the future.
Absolutely.
It's very exciting.
It is. I think we're at an exciting point, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So we're heading into the final furlong of our conversation this evening or this morning. So in the concluding section, I'm intrigued to know who has inspired you most and why.
Well, it sounds corny to say Harry Edwards, but he really is an inspiration.
Mm.
And as I said earlier on, that was the first time we'd been to the sanctuary last year. Kim and I flew over and we spent some time with you and other people. I was absolutely blown away with it. And so, I mean, he's always been that rock, if you like. But there are many, many other people. I mean, when I was in England, I used to follow Matthew Manning. And he's he's sort of written several books. I used to read about him, and there's loads of people. Wayne Dyer, who wasn't necessarily a healer, but he used to be inspirational in all his work. And since we've been here, of course, we've seen quite a few people over here. But I'm a great believer in, people used to say to me, "Oh, you must read this," and they still do. You must read that. And I'm a great believer in, you look at a book that somebody said you must read, and you just look at a page or a couple of pages. If it doesn't resonate with you, then put it away. Mm-hmm. And I found over the years, and I've got a bookshelf of books, and I've got books on there that I've never read. And occasionally I'll pick one up and I'll look at it. I think, this is amazing. This is absolute. And what's happened, of course, the book hasn't changed, but you change, and you're much more open then to reading whatever it is that you've got. Yeah. So just go with what feels right for you, in your gut feeling that this is right. I need to follow this person or go and see them or whatever.
Yeah. And what sense of purpose or mission or duty guides you in your life?
Well, I came to the States really with the intention of completely changing the health system. And for those of you that live in the States will know what a stupid idea that was. But I still believe there is opportunity for the health system here, particularly to change. And I think the more people that do this work and the more people that go, and I always say to my patients, when you go back to your doctor, tell them you've had healing. The more we can start to broaden it out so that it's not woo-woo anymore, that people understand that it's, it's really powerful. And that is the future of medicine, as I explained earlier on. In my view, is where we all work together, offering whatever the client needs.
What is your favorite book and why?
Oh my goodness me, I've got so many books I've read. You put me on the spot there, Alison. I'm not sure. I've started reading quite a few novels as well these days, just to sort of switch off from all the work. I think one of the books that sticks out is, I think it was Matthew Manning's. I think it's called One Foot in the Stars, and that was had quite an influence on me when I read it at the time. It's going back quite a few years, but a lot of Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, a lot of good stuff around.
Do you have an inspiring quote that you could share with us?
Actually, I do.
Hey.
It goes something like, "Nothing can dim the light that shines within."
Love it.
So whatever your light is, nothing can dim that light.
Yeah.
Just allow it to shine. And we've all got that light within us. Just allow it to shine.
Yeah, love it. How can people find out more about Healing in America and keep up to date with your activities?
Well, you can either look at our website, which is healinginamerica.com, or you can just email me, Roger Ford at Healing in America. And we do like you do in England. We have a newsletter which goes out every week, which usually talks about a modality, which is a healing thing. So we try and keep up to date with what's going on. And I talk a lot about emotional stuff and how we can release stuff. And and I usually put a couple of English cartoons at the end, which people in England get, people in America very often don't get, but that's okay.
I'm on your list for your newsletter.
Yeah.
And I love your cartoons and I get it every time. And I look forward to receiving it on a Tuesday. It comes out during the working day on our time. And those cartoons always make me chuckle. But I also love your articles, Roger. And the articles are so good that we've actually started reproducing them in the Harry Edwards Healing Sanctuary magazine called The Healer. I absolutely love your articles. I think they're spot on, and they're the kind of articles that you can feel that you can really learn from, and they remind you of key things to keep in your mind on various subjects. So no, we absolutely love receiving that.
And all of for those of you, those of you that are interested in reading any of those, if you look on our website, Healing in America, they're all stored under, if you look under blog, then all the blogs, they're all kept under the blogs there. So you can have a look at those. Or email me, as I say, and I'm happy to. In fact, I had an email this morning from somebody in England who was asking about healing, and I've arranged to have a telephone call with him, and I recommend him to come and see you at the sanctuary.
Thank you. Roger, thank you so much for doing this interview and being in our hot seat for this occasion. It's been really lovely talking with you about these subjects and hearing your views and things and finding out more about you. And we can all learn from the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared with us tonight. So thank you so much for doing this interview. It's been really insightful and helpful, and a lovely conversation. What I'll do now is stop the recording, and those in the Zoom room can ask Roger any questions. So if you'd just like to hold on a minute, I'll stop the recording.